Hey, all you Arizona lovers. This is the Finding Arizona podcast, episode number 374. I'm your host, Jose. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Today's episode is with Martha, who is an author and photographer. She's also a environmentalist. I'd like to say a little bit of environmentalist, a little bit of sustainabilitist. That might be a word, but I just want to say thank you to Martha for coming in, and we want to appreciate every person that has come into our doors, and hopefully they get their recognition by their bio and links. We try our best to write that out as best as we can to every episode underneath in the bios below. So we hope that you guys are enjoying every episode of our podcast at findingarizonapodcast.com. We make it easy for you guys to connect with us social media wise. Everything is under Finding Arizona Podcast. It's a little bit of an update on what's going on in our neck of the woods. I have help this weekend. Yes, my in-laws are in town to help with Atlas. They are doing wonderfully. They enjoy coming to see our little guy, and this time of year it's a lot cooler for them, and so we are just enjoying ourselves on the outside and spending as much time with Atlas as we can. So we hope that you guys are doing the same thing, as enjoying the weather and enjoying the cooler months as we progress along into the winter months. We hope that also you guys are liking and subscribing to every episode, because we want to hear from you to let us know who you want in next. That is always important to us, and so we will just jump straight into the episode. This is episode number 374 with Martha. We will catch you on the next one. Bye, y'all.
Who is a no woman?
She's ambitious.
She is a juggling life.
Oh, she is high performing.
She's self-made.
Definitely busy.
Woman supporter.
Cares about the rooms that she's going into.
Building an empire.
Definitely working in a male-dominated industry.
She is competitive.
And cares about impact.
And she's inspired by the word no.
Oh, completely relentless.
She is self-made.
She is a badass.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Finding Arizona podcast. I'm your host, Jose, and as always, we bring in very special guests every week, and today is no different. Ladies and gentlemen, this person is a photographer, a writer, just a wonderful person, because we just talked off air. But ladies and gentlemen, I'd love to introduce you to Martha. Martha, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you coming in. We're going to talk a little bit about your book, but overall, we're going to talk about you as a person. And one of the things that I've always asked everyone who comes through our door is give us a little bit of your origin story and how art and writing and just all of this has come to you in your life.
Okay, well, I am from Pennsylvania and born and raised there. Came from a family with a lot of artistic people in it, but not my mother and father. Mom was a public school teacher. Dad was an engineer. Does figure into the story.
Yes.
And when I was 8 years old, Mom and Dad decided we're going to move to the woods. We had a house built in the woods outside of Philadelphia, about 25 miles west.
Oh, wow.
Moved there when I was almost 9 years old. And the grade school was just down the street in a nature preserve.
Wow. Can you give us, okay, so that is a very interesting kind of like turn of events, because I will let you know from my own experience, I actually spent my childhood in Allentown, Pennsylvania. That's where I grew up for a big portion of my life with my family. And so I know a little bit of the area. Can you give me a general is it in the Poconos, or are you south of there?
This was southeastern Pennsylvania. I was born in Pittsburgh and raised outside of Pittsburgh and Philadelphia.
Okay.
The house in the woods is about 25 miles west of Philadelphia.
Okay.
Mom and Dad had it built. We all moved in there. It was an unfinished house, and the Retallick family finished it.
Nice.
And that includes me. I was an only child. And if you're an only child, it's 2 against 1. Your parents always win. So I was drafted to do a lot of projects like painting, bricklaying, caulking, putty, you name it. If they needed an extra pair of hands, it didn't matter that I was a kid in the single digits. I got drafted.
Yes.
And this nature preserve just down the street, the school with floor-to-ceiling windows, which were perfect for looking out of and not paying attention in class.
Yes, I already picture it in my head.
I would sit there and sketch the woods.
Aw.
Which greatly annoyed my 4th grade math teacher, Mrs. G. And she would launch into blistering tirades in front of the whole class over the fact that I was not paying attention. And she predicted a dire future for Martha because I wasn't paying attention in math class. And you know what? She was right. The fact that I lacked the building blocks of math in grade school really made high school science, especially chemistry, a struggle. And I figured, okay, I'll just load up on art classes. But here's the thing that happens with high school art. You can be really good at drawing pictures during math class at elementary school. But you get into high school and there are other kids who have gotten a lot better at various types of art than you were.
Yeah.
And so if I wanted to retain the ability to stay in the high school art program, so much for fine art. I'm going over into commercial art. I have an ability to do graphic design, and I worked in that field for 20 years. I also discovered photography.
Oh, wow.
And oh my goodness, you talk about taking to that like a duck to water. It was art I could do.
Yes.
And what's really cool about it is the camera is like an editing device.
Very much so, yes.
Especially if you're interested in nature. I'm not just interested in that tree. I want to explore that leaf, specifically the vein structure in that leaf. This is where you can go with it. Now, at Westchester East High School, and yes, that was the name of the place.
Nice.
If you had ability to do photography, they had work for you to do. We documented the activities of the school. We covered the sporting events, assemblies, award ceremonies, homecoming queen nominees. We photographed it. And I thought that would be quite a good background for when I went off to the University of Michigan to join the school paper to be a photographer.
Okay.
And University of Michigan, I was a 2nd-generation alum. Go Blue.
Nice. Yes.
They have these things at the beginning of the school year called mass meetings.
Oh.
And they had one at the Michigan Daily. I went to the photo office with all the other photographic wannabes, and then the staff walked in with Nikon cameras.
The professional ones.
Yeah, the professional ones. How can I begin to afford that? My high school didn't have the budget for that equipment, neither did I.
Yes.
So I chickened out of joining the daily photo staff.
Aww.
And I went back the following year to become a reporter. I did have quite a writing ability, so I learned a lot about writing for Deadlight and being engaging about it. And that was quite a challenge, but I hung out at the Daily for almost 3 years and learned that skill. Then after I graduated, I got a job, stayed in Ann Arbor, and then a year later got laid off.
Wow, what a story.
And while I was in Ann Arbor, I had gotten quite into bicycling. So I thought, I know what? I'm going to bicycle to Minneapolis. I'd been there the summer right after I graduated because one of my friends got married. And I liked it. So I thought, I know what? I'm going to bicycle from this part of the Great Lakes region to Minnesota, and I'm going to get me another job.
Wow.
Well, I started out from just east of Detroit with a group that was going to a bicycle rally. These were a thing back in the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
People who were very interested in bicycling would get together at a certain location, and there would be bicycle rides for days on end.
Nice.
And other events. And then I joined the group riding over there, and then I joined a different group to ride to the Buffalo area where my mother is from. Never had been there on a bike before. And then they drove me to the U.S.-Canadian border. You see that bridge there? Bicycle across that thing. You're in Canada.
Wow.
Welcome to bicycle touring by yourself.
Nice.
And later that summer, this is 1980, I got the idea from another bicycle tourist to bicycle in all 50 states. And I had the Nikon camera that I got for Christmas 1976, my sophomore year at Michigan. And I documented my bicycle touring.
Aw.
So I thought, oh, now this is something I could do. I wasn't a daily photographer, but I can do this.
Yeah.
And that got me into the game as a photographer. I wrote a couple of books about that experience, not with photos in them, because back in the 1980s and 90s, you print a book with photos in it, that was very expensive.
Oh, yeah. I can imagine.
And I tried to get commercial publishers interested in my travels and my books. But here's the thing about the commercial publishing industry. Nowadays, it has become highly oligopolistic, meaning that the industry is controlled by a handful of large companies. Collectively, they are called the Big Six.
Okay.
If you are not a major celebrity or even a social media influencer, it is very difficult to get them to take notice of you, much less publish you.
Yeah, and we're talking about like Penguin, right? Like,
yes.
am I on the right? Okay.
Yes, that sort of publishers.
Yes. Okay. I'm just double checking.
And so if you're an indie, what started to happen in the 70s and 80s, what was called self-publishing was not the mark of shame anymore. It became an entrepreneurial option.
Nice.
So I started self-publishing back in the 1980s.
Okay. Nice.
And this latest project, City Nature, is just my latest. So I have some experience at this.
Yes, you have plenty of experience. And that just kind of is just the tip of the iceberg of our conversation here. And I just want to say, like, kudos for you to take the initiative to like take something like as simple as bike riding, as most people would imagine, just like, you know, a lot of bike riders will end up just like, oh, I love this thing that I do, and probably just make it just a hobby. But you transitioned yourself from like bike riding into a pretty much a very big enthusiast. And on top of that, you know, using your skill level of photography to allow it to kind of overlap one another into this new kind of understand, like writing and being an author and self-publishing, and allowing that to just kind of, I feel like it's a good way of like transition. Like, it's just, okay, I have this one thing that I really love doing, and now it's allowing me to use my other skill sets to make something completely new for me. And so I think that's a wonderful story. And can I ask how you ended up in Tucson?
Okay. My introduction to Arizona story happened in November of 1981. I'm bicycling around the United States, and I'm coming out of California. My last night in California, a tremendous windstorm blew into the campground where I was in El Centro.
Oh.
And being in California, the next morning, I packed up my tent and could not get on Interstate 8 because there was a side road. And Caltrans and the California Highway Patrol are very strict about that. If there's no alternative, you can ride the interstate, but if there is, you got to ride it. I took the Evan Hewis Highway, which was like the potholiest pothole minefield I've ever seen. And I'm from Pennsylvania. I know potholes. And then I got back onto the interstate, and there was this rest area that is between the eastbound and westbound sections of I-8.
Okay.
And the sandstorm had come up by that time. And I could not see. I was taking my water bottle and irrigating my eyes. And this couple from Escondido spotted me and said, "Do you need help?" Yes. And they took me over to Yuma, Arizona. They were on their way over to Arizona to look at some horses they were considering buying.
Oh, okay.
So they dropped me off in Yuma, where it was perfectly sunny, clear. The wind was not a problem. What I did not know at the time was ferocious sandstorms tend to be followed by rainstorms. I didn't know this, so I left Yuma, kept on going, and the rain got me the next day.
Oh man.
outside of Tacna, Arizona on I-8.
Okay.
And that rain followed me all the way to Phoenix.
Wow.
So
Jeez.
what I learned about rain in Arizona, which figures very prominently in the water harvesting story, is that Arizona may not get a lot of rain, but when it does, when it rains, it pours.
Oh yeah. And it's kind of intriguing that that was your first inkling of like weather patterns will allow you to now do another transition into understanding and using water harvesting. And it's just kind of like I'm just building up this kind of overlapping kind of story arc of like you go from this one transition to another transition to another transition, and it's really wonderful to kind of pick up the story as a whole, because you're allowing yourself to be open to this and just kind of like brain just like kind of like snaps to, oh, this is going on, oh, this is like, and it just allows you to kind of build momentum, so to speak. And what a wonderful like way of like your introduction into the state as well, just understanding when it rains and it pours.
Yeah, so fundamentally what we have here, with the rain being so infrequent, and when it is here, it's quite abundant, we have a management problem. It's often said here in Tucson, we get enough rain from the sky to meet all of our water needs. The trouble with urban environments like Tucson is when a big sudden rainstorm happens, about 55% of the rain becomes runoff.
Yeah.
Which can flood the streets and the washes, and that can be very dangerous. In fact, I was almost washed away in a flood when I was trying to bicycle home one fine evening in 2011.
Wow.
So I can speak to the power of rainwater when it's being runoff.
Yes.
Now, in nature, the same big rainstorm, about 50% of that water just soaks into the ground. I mean, sure, they have flooding out there in the middle of Nowhereville, but no big deal. It's not causing us any trouble.
Yeah.
The wildlife is happy, the plants are happy, but the humans aren't living out there, so what?
Yeah.
Now, in Tucson, I've lived here since 1987. I came here because, well, I wanted to ride my bike year-round, and the job market was a heck of a lot better than Pittsburgh, and I've been here ever since. And I bought my house in 2004, and there was nothing but crushed rock in the front yard and an out-of-control mess of Bermuda grass in the backyard.
Nice. Okay.
And as one of my friends said, that's your palate. And people of Arizona, I want to tell you something about people from Pennsylvania. We love trees.
Yes.
And we are the original tree huggers. And at this part of the world, the trees are not that huggable.
No, they're not. And that's for a very specific kind of evolutionary standpoint reason. So I'll just be frank. I am a landscape architect. I went to school for landscape architecture at ASU. So my
program.
Yeah. I grew up on the Hopi Reservation up north, and that was my first. After I left Pennsylvania, we moved back to the reservation, and that was my first introduction into rainwater harvesting in the sense of using it for crops, for corn.
Yes,
and that's dry farming is a big element out there on. So when I was growing up, I would see my grandfather, doing planting and just using the kind of what he had in his fields. And so for me, I never realized that landscape architecture was a thing until I actually got to ASU. I was actually going to go into the architecture program. And when I found out about landscape, I was like, that's perfect. That's exactly, I already know it. I already know how to do it. I already have things that kind of bring me and draw me into it. So I quickly changed my degree, but luckily they're like, They're very easy about when it's the same school and same design elements, that it was an easy transition for me to go from one program to the next. But again, I fell in love with it, and it has been one part of my education was, again, understanding rainwater harvesting and trying to implement that into society and into your everyday. So I had a course on it. I was very much that's where this book comes, and we'll start talking about this. You actually know the fella here, Mr. Brad, and I'd love to get your understanding about how rainwater harvesting came to you, started implementing it in your home, and how it's a big part of your own book and your own writing, and just how you came across Brad here. And if you want to see the picture, I'm going to show it up to
I
Brad.
do.
how he came into your life.
He's like the godfather of water harvesting here. And I heard about him when I'm pretty sure it was when I was house hunting before I moved in here.
Oh, really?
And I heard through the grapevine that there's this water harvesting book coming out by a guy named Brad Lancaster.
Huh.
Ooh, I got to order that one because I'm interested in that. I want to do that in my new house.
Yeah.
So I ordered it, and I did an advance order, and it was like, 2 or 3 years before I actually got my hand on the book. And I got my hands on the book in early 2006. And I had moved in here in 2004.
Okay.
I'd already planted a couple of trees. And back at the time, Brad was doing home visits to do consultations with people.
Oh, really?
And that's how I met him back in early 2006. And one of the things he suggested to me were to plant ironwoods west of the driveway, which I have done.
Mm-hmm.
And, they are thorny, nasty trees. Don't even dare try hugging them. And I didn't really water them much.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2009, they just took off. They're like 25 feet high now, and they're like my prime bird habitat. So far this year, I've had mourning doves, white-winged doves, cactus wrens. I think there's an active goldfinch nest in one of the trees now.
Wow.
So, ironwood trees for the win. My mesquite trees, the doves try to build nests in it, and they fail every time because doves build nests on flat surfaces. They're called shelf nesters. Okay. And I had 2 mesquite trees. I called one of them Scraggles because it never took off, and I called the other one Y because it was a Y shape.
Yeah.
Well, Scraggles had to get cut down in 2009, but Y is now about as tall as the ironwood trees, and it's east of the driveway, shading my front yard. I'm looking
awesome.
And that tree, it's a bit of an ornery tree. It's poked me with thorns many times, so I'd like to say it hates me, but it produces really good pods that I grind into flour and make things like cookies.
And that's part of your book.
All is forgiven, tree. I'm looking right at you, but there you go.
That's awesome.
The thing with the water harvesting is I got the trees planted. I started working on sculpting the landscape, and I really had to do it. Mm-hmm. Because my ever-efficient neighborhood grapevine told me that my yard would flood to the point where the water would come in the house.
Oh.
And in the backyard, I could see why, because the backyard sloped toward the house, and I had to do something about that.
Yeah.
I tried various things on my own, getting ideas from Brad's books, and everything I tried just epically failed. And it would rain, and I would stand in the house and worry and wonder when the water would come in. Never did. And I realized, by 2006-07, I need help. Mm-hmm. So I turned to a local organization called Watershed Management Group, which at the time had a co-op, was based on the barn raising model where people would go around and help each other build water harvesting projects.
Yeah.
And they really did a lot here to sculpt my earthworks. And later on, when I could afford it, install gray water harvesting that waters 3 fruit trees. And I also have a cistern now.
Yeah.
Now, they have since transitioned to being more of an education and advocacy organization, but they created a local business model of opportunities in the water harvesting business. And there are quite a few local entities taking advantage of that now.
Yeah. Well, that's a wonderful story. I mean, because in itself, you are just letting us know that there are entities out there that people can use as resources. Not this one in particular as of today, but there are still out there. I know from over here in Phoenix, there is a tree association that allows one part education, one part for you to, grow your own first tree, and they'll educate you on planting for the first one. And there's actually a city board group that is looking to introduce trees and native trees in particular to help Phoenix with their kind of the warming of the city, like just as a kind of cool down, like because of the shade and what it allows for not only nature but humans in general, and what that kind of system provides. I wanted to also mention, you were bringing up the ironwood trees. Particularly being on the western side of your home, and Brad in his book provides kind of this program and understanding why those trees are so good, and more in a programmatic reasoning why, of like, if you have them here on the western side, they're more friendly to like help you with shade, and also wind, helping with the winds, slowing down the wind, and a lot of other reasonable understanding of like why the trees should be here instead of over here on the other side of the home.
Right. One thing about my place is the north side, where they recommend that you put trees. I have 2 overhead utility easements for the neighbors, so I can't do it.
Yeah.
I have shrubs in the backyard, and like the pomegranates don't get that tall. It's not going to interfere with overhead utility lines. And the lemon tree and the fig are around to the side where they're really not going to be an issue.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's so fascinating for, just in the programmatic sense of like where certain trees and shrubs go to because of the home and how it's built. Me in particular, so mine's on my home here is actually so it's a north-south, kind of oriented. In the back, we have 3 mesquite trees. Like you, I call them my 3 kind of like, one's a mini, like what I call the mini, and it's not doing so well because there's a very large kind of like 48-gallon mesquite that has overgrown and become the massive, wide-spreading mesquite that you would see in a natural element of like outdoor by a Rio, just kind of like beautiful. It's gorgeous. I don't want to do anything with it, but it looks like it's about kind of like a nice, it's got a nice tilt to it. So sometimes I'm like, oh man, am I gonna wake up at the next storm and it's kind of falling over and taking out my wall? But I love it because it provides the most like largest shade in our backyard, and it's wonderful because I have a 2-year-old, and we put a swing on one of the arms, and so he likes to just sit on it and just swing by himself, and he's enamored by it because he looks up and he'll see birds nesting in there. He'll point, and it's just been a wonderful tree element. And we have 2 more kind of like bottle trees, and those are really nice, but they, like, again, it's not I love more native mesquite and Palo Verde trees, just because I growing up around here, and just kind of the native species is just so interesting to me, and how, again, the evolutionary standpoint of like they're spiky because they're trying to keep out the animals from taking their nutrients. It's kind of this beautiful element of like, you don't see a lot of things grow the way they grow. It's an environmental thing. It's because we live in the Sonoran Desert is the reason why these plants are the way they are. And I suggest in particular those who are interested in it, and I have another book here, A Natural History of the Sonoran Desert, which I picked up from grad school, but it's a great book from the Arizona Sonoran Desert Museum. And for those,
I got to read that one.
Yeah, it's a really good collection of not only shrubs, and trees, but also elements of animals, overall ecological, just evolutionary story. And it's really great read. I hope that people would find it very interesting, that who grow up around here would be very interested in it. So that being said, I would also like to get people interested in your book. I want to hear more about like some of the elements that you provide in your book, because one that we talked about was your kind of you take the pods from the mesquite trees and you grind them up into flowers, and you actually give the recipe in your book, how to make them. But it's like all these other elements that you've picked up growing up in the area, or even kind of your overall history about being a bicyclist and being a nature lover. This is all elements of your writing and all elements in your book. So I'd love to understand a little bit more about, how long did this book take? How is it just a cornucopia of different photos? Is there certain focuses that you want people to understand in this book?
This started out as an effort to learn a new camera system, which I bought in June of 2018.
Okay.
And, June in Tucson, just like Phoenix, it's hot.
Yeah.
And I did not feel like going out in public to practice.
Okay.
With people, because you know how people can be. It's like, come on, Martha, would you figure out how to set that camera and get this done? So I went to my backyard, and I figured that the trees and rocks and flowers and birds would have a whole lot more patience with me.
Of course.
So I went around the backyard trying to shoot good photos and epically failed. And this is, July of 18. Now, in August of 2018, I went back to Pennsylvania to visit my elderly mother. By this time, she was 92 years old.
Oh, wow.
Really not going to live too much longer.
Yeah.
And so I took the camera with me. And remember, I mentioned that grade school in the nature preserve?
Yeah.
Still there.
Oh, wow.
I went around in back of Penwood School with the camera and started talking myself through photo shoots with it. And I got it. I figured it out. So with that discovery in mind, I started taking photos and editing them down to the best every day and taking them back home to show to Mom, who really couldn't walk. She could walk to maybe the living room and the kitchen, and that was it. She couldn't walk around the neighborhood anymore. So I was showing her the neighborhood.
Wow, that's awesome.
So, okay, bought the camera, fumbled and stumbled around, then went to Mom, back to the old school, figured it out. After I came back to Tucson, I kept right on document. I went back to documenting my yard now that I could figured it out and figured out how to do it.
Wow, that's awesome. Like that to me is just a wonderful, again, another piece of your life that has allowed you to like grow and learn, but allow your family to connect as well. That's so wonderful. And again, I have so much research about you that I'm like, I want to talk about, because it's, again, your mom was a teacher, but your dad is this also an engineer. Like you have so much different elements, a part of your life that has so much interconnection, that where you are now is just this kind of a book of different things that I think really is shown in this latest book here, with the kind of writing and elements that you provide in it. It just shows where your life has a collection of different pieces that you bring together in this kind of wonderful book that you provide for everyone. And so I'm encouraging everyone, and I will go out and myself to seek out the book and kind of go through it, and if not, own it for myself. As you can tell, I have a big book collection, and the library is just like right over here on the other side of the wall. But I do love my books. So that's really great.
I do too. And one of the things that I've discovered about this book, I was really aiming it toward adults who were interested in home and garden improvement.
Yeah.
Or home and garden design.
Yeah.
And what's happened is people are telling me that it means so much to their whole family. One man told me that he likes to sit his 8-year-old son on one side of him, his 9-year-old son on the other side. They read the book together.
Oh. That's awesome. I
And
love that.
someone else told me that his 9-month-old grandchild loves to look at the pictures. I call that a reader. You open my book and engage with it. I'll take you as a reader all day long, even if you're just 9 months old. Keep going.
Yes, absolutely. So, as a last bit, I tend to want to keep these kind of structured, but I love our conversation, and I'll just ask kind of this singular lasting or kind of ending question is because I'm so interested, and so is my wife, in the gray water and using the water, and more specifically from our washing machine to help us water and provide nutrients to we're thinking about making a garden and having, because we already have a cistern here in the backyard, but I'd love to just kind of peek into your life and how this water system works for you and how you feel about the gray water and using it.
Okay, the thing about gray water, and yours truly learned this the hard way, read the ingredients on your laundry soap very carefully. I started out using a soap that was not doing very well with my plants, and I couldn't figure out why. Nothing was thriving. Then I read the ingredients, and there were 3 different sodium compounds. I now use a soap called Oasis that I buy at the food co-op here in Tucson. Not the only place to buy it here. There is a store opening up here on Grant Road called the Rain Store. They sell water harvesting supplies, and they also stock Oasis.
Okay.
The other thing is that at this time of the year, I have 3 plants on the system. My fig plant is in a planter, which means the water has to go up to it.
Yes.
From the washing machine, it just doesn't make it.
Yeah.
So I've had to find other ways of watering, the good old figster, like, I got to wash the dishes for the fig tree, and I wash the dishes into a little basin and then pour the soapy water out on the plants. Or say if you're taking a shower and before you step in there, you want to mix the water up just right. I use the tub spout, drain that water into a bucket, and then take it out to the plants like the figster. So the lemon tree and the pomegranate tree are doing pretty well on 1 load of laundry a week at this time of the year. The thing to remember in the fall, especially with my lemon tree, is I turn the emitters off because that thing can get overwatered very easily during the fall and the winter, and that makes for a very unhappy tree come spring.
Yes.
Pomegranate, I generally turn its emitters off too for the same reason. It's very easy to overwater those. Now, I have an overflow out in the backyard that's like a geyser. It's fun to watch. There's a picture of it in the book. With any water harvesting system, you want to plan for the overflow. In a gray water system, your overflow, if your emitter's clogged, that water is going to come back into the house and destroy your washing machine. So that's why my little backyard geyser is there.
Okay. Nice. These are all very beautiful elements that, again, as a person who's interested in building his own gray water system, it's just kind of helpful tips that allow me to look for and understand what I'm trying to do because ours is like, it's in the back and kind of in the washer ends up like at the back corner. And so we're just like, okay, how do we do this? How are we going to, use this kind of part of the house to feed these plants and feed what we want to grow? So again, there's just things to consider, things to remember, and things that we are trying to do also for the future is like one of the elements that I always try and, or one thing that we're trying to do here is also in the future, provide a off the grid kind of secondary cottage for my parents in the future as they get into their elderly ages. We want them to have a place where they can call home in the future and, provide them also an opportunity to be close to their grandson, different things like that, where it's also her family comes and visits us from San Diego and then giving them a space for their own kind of time to, just have their own space. But again, it's like we're trying to remember all of these things that we want to put into our perfect home sort of thing and what we want to build into. And this is our home is about like, I think 70 years old. It's like built in the 1940s or 50s, something like that. And it's one of those things that we want to beautify, want to keep and this is something that we want to build into. So thank you again for providing so much content, so much, feedback for what you do as an artist and as a writer and as an author. I usually kick off our last question is kind of future goals, anything that you want to share or provide people, maybe a book signing or something that you want to just kind of share with us.
I am going to be participating in an event at Bicus on September 9th here, 29th of September. It's called the Bicus Art Mart at Dark.
Okay.
And that's in Tucson. Let me give you their web address so you can find out more about it. I'm going there right now to see if they have it up on their site yet. Okay. Opening up the website. Okay, their web address is Bicus, B as in Bravo, I as in India, C as in Charlie, A as in Alpha, C as in Sierra.org.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have this event posted yet because we are just at the beginning of September, but they will soon. I am also working on other events. And of course, you could always buy the book through citynaturebbook.com.
Awesome.
And I'd like to emphasize that when you order, the people who do the shipping are right here in Tucson.
Yes, that's another element that we were that I would love to local everything.
And the team for production was largely local. I did have some help from a man in the Atlanta area and also another one in Long Beach, California, but everybody else on the team was local.
Awesome.
Printing was local. Binding up in Phoenix at BindTech Roswell. Printing here in Tucson with AZ Litho.
Nice. I love that. I think that as a person who's like, again, a local lover, what this podcast provides is just an opportunity to hear from the locals and what they've got going. It's just, again, another wonderful element to be able to share with our audience. On top of which, you are a member of Local First Arizona, which I also was like, oh, that's another, because we did an episode with them as well.
Yes, I am a member. And speaking of Local First, there is a Local First event in Tucson at Tucson Tamale this coming Wednesday.
Oh, awesome.
In the evening. And I'm going to take my good old copy of City Nature and do a little show and tell. It loves to go to parties. I do show and tell on a regular basis.
As you should.
In addition to doing the public appearances.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Martha, for allowing us to kind of pick your brain and also share what you've been up to for the last, wonderful decades. And I would like to just say you have an energy about you that is just infectious. And I really do mean it from the bottom of my heart that I wish you nothing but the best of luck. And as we transition out of this conversation, we go into our little outro here. We always say you can catch every episode of our podcast at findingarizonapodcast.com. And if you want to follow us on social media, Finding Arizona Podcast, and send us an email at findingarizonapodcast@gmail.com. We try to provide everyone with their selection of who they want in next. And as always, we end every episode with kisses, hugs, and belly rubs to our four-legged friends, and we will catch you next time. Good night, y'all.